Hello, everybody. Welcome to our presentation on large-scale Scrum. My name is Joey Hinckley,
And my name is Kate Vandermolen.
and here we go.
All right, before we can talk about large-scale Scrum, we need to cover Scrum. So what is Scrum? Scrum is a framework developed by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland. In their words, Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. Scrum is founded on empiricism and lean thinking. Empiricism asserts that knowledge comes from experience and making decisions based on what is observed. Lean thinking reduces waste and focuses on the essentials. It's important to note that Scrum is not the same thing as Agile, rather, it is an implementation of the Agile philosophies in a defined structure. There are 4 steps of Scrum. First, the product owner, or the boss, adds work to a backlog. The backlog is an ordered list of what improvements the product needs. From the backlog, the Scrum team selects their work. After reaching their definition of done, the work is brought before the whole team for inspection. Depending on the results, the team will either redo the item or move on to the next. Scrum is made up of teams of less than 10 people.
So the question is, how do we do this on a larger scale? And if you would ask the founder of large-scale Scrum, Craig Larman, he would say, don't. Simply don't. It's not worth it. And the example he gives is the semi-automatic ground environment. This was one of the first attempts at a large-scale software product development. Started off in the 1950s with hundreds of people, and it took a huge amount of effort, very long time, it went way over budget, and at the end, one of the directors was asked if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? And his answer was find the 10 best people and write the entire thing themselves. And that brings us to LeSS. So let's say you insist on doing a big project and need a lot of people for it and not going to listen to Greg Larman's advice and decide you want to do something on a larger scale. What's important to understand is that large scale Scrum is Scrum. It's not new improved Scrum. It's not Scrum at the bottom of each team and then something else laid on top. It is Scrum. It's about figuring out how to apply the principles, purpose, and elements and elegance of Scrum in a large-scale context as simply as possible. So this is the Scrum, the large LES framework. Sorry. So it starts on the left here with the product owner filling up the backlog. Then in Sprint Planning 1, teams come together and pick items from the top of the backlog to work on over the sprint. And then this is followed by Sprint Planning 2, where the teams split off into separate groups and decide how they individually are going to work on their and accomplish their products that they select from the backlog. Followed by that, each self-managing team will work on their features and collaborate with the other teams whenever needed. Then about halfway through, each sprint team takes a break from their features to refine the backlog, right, during product backlog refinement. This is done with the end customers and is helpful to make sure that what we are developing is something that the customer actually wants. Then we go back into working on our feature teams, and then until we get to the sprint review. In the sprint review, teams show customers what has been accomplished over the sprint and how to best increment from there. Following this, teams reflect on what they did and how they can improve as a team. And then there's an overall retrospective period where everyone comes together and how the whole process can be improved as one huge team. And then we start the next sprint and go at it again. Some important things to note is that there's one product log. While there's many teams, there's only one product owner and one product backlog, which is a key difference here from Scrum of Scrums or Scrum Scaled Up and LeSS. It's also important to note that development is iterative and incremental, and the main goal of LeSS is to descale the company. Moving on. So let's say this LeSS works great for if you have a Scrum's teams of 2 to 8 people, which is around 50 people. If you have anything more to 50 people, up to say like many thousands of people, we get something called less huge, which is essentially when companies just go even bigger. And in essence, it's just many LES frameworks piled on top of one another. And that brings us to the core 10 principles of LESS. The LESS framework is entirely founded on these 10 principles. We won't go into all of them, but one we will touch on is more with less. More with less means it's discouraging a lot of things that we typically find in corporations, such as handoffs, preparation sprints, stabilization sprints, dependencies, separate architects, and separate backlogs, to just name a few. We're really trying to accomplish more with the bare bones minimum of what we need to get done.
Now that we know what LeSS is, we can discuss some companies which have chosen to implement LeSS. Here are all of the companies that Craig Larman himself has consulted. And one example we will look at in depth is JP Morgan. So in JP Morgan's case, they are a large company with over 3,000 employees, and there were many sub-teams that mostly focused on components of their products. Within these sub-teams, sometimes certain components of Agile or even Scrum were used sporadically. But because these teams focused on components of each product or each aspect of development, a lot of waterfall-style handoff would occur, which led to inefficiencies in product development. After a leadership session discussing large-scale Scrum, executives at JP Morgan were receptive to implementing it, and it was decided that the securities department would be the first to reorganize under LESS. The first step for JP Morgan's securities department to implement large-scale Scrum was to identify the customer-centric products to organize feature teams under. An effort was then made to identify the product owners for each product from the business side of operations. Once product owners and their products were well defined, the people that would be working on those products were then organized into true Scrum feature teams, cross-component and cross-functional teams that would focus on the development of a whole feature. Since the feature teams were self-organizing, the need for level 1 managers was eliminated. People that were previously identified as leaders, and thus promoted into managerial positions, would return to active development, thus having the additional burden of managing shifted off of them. And this led to happier workers and more efficient teams. So after implementation, the securities department recorded a number of improvements. With cross-component feature teams, people spent less time in handoffs and context switching, and more time focusing on feature development. These teams also provided greater flexibility to the company in working on large features and small features. The teams experienced fewer bottlenecks as there wasn't any need to wait for verification from other teams for implementations. As a result, the company saw quicker turnaround times for smaller and more urgent requests, and for larger features, transparency was increased as the teams produced burn-up statistics, improving release planning and scheduling for executives.
All right, thank you guys for listening to our presentation on large-scale Scrum. Goodbye.